Okay, we are recording. Hello and welcome everyone to Covenant Calendar Club. We're so glad that you're here this evening, and we pray that you will be richly blessed by the words that you're about to hear out of the Torah and through the mouth of our teachers. Before we begin, we'd like to give you a big, warm shout-out welcome and say,
Shalom,
Shalom.
Hello.
we are glad that you are here with us. And if you'd like to get in on some of the conversation after the teaching, you can join Covenant Calendar Club at studythecalendar.com. And with that said, we're going to go ahead and turn the screen over to Charlene.
Okay, let's do that. I hope everybody's ready for tonight.
We're ready. Yes.
We have 90 slides tonight, and we're going to do parts 2 and 3. We had part 1 about 4 or 5 or 6 weeks ago, and we're going to review a little bit from part 1 because maybe not everybody saw it. And we're also going to do a little extra review tonight on Day of Atonement. We've done those twice before, but we've got some revised material tonight and some new and expanded material. So I just want you to sit back and enjoy, and save your questions for at the end. But anyway, I was just really happy to hear that prayer that was just offered for wisdom, and that's how we're starting out tonight. From Proverbs 1, verses 2 to 6, I adapted these verses from the New Living Translation in the today's English version to Covenant Calendar attributes, and I think that you'll find this is very interesting. I want to read these verses 2 to 6 as we start out tonight. One purpose of calendar studies is to teach you wisdom and discipline, to help you recognize good advice and understand sayings with deep meaning. This is what it would say in verse 2. In verse 3, through these studies, many will receive instruction in discipline and good conduct. The Covenant Calendar study will groom an inexperienced person to be clever and to teach the new people how to be resourceful. Covenant Calendar studies can even add to the knowledge of wise men and give guidance to the educated. And in verse 6, so that each one can understand the hidden meanings of Yahuwah's calendar to solve the riddles and the problems that even sages raise. And I found that really interesting because a lot of us depend on what the sages have to say, and sometimes they don't always have it right. Next week we want to do some studies on the dawn day with historical secular quotes and see what some of the sages have to say. But tonight we are going to go into grammar lessons part 2, and there will be a part 3. In part 1 we were talking about Genesis 1:5. That said, Yahuwah called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And we especially wanted to understand the last part of this verse, which says, and the evening and the morning were the first day. That is where so many people say the day starts in the evening. And we were looking to see, does evening really mean sunset or not? So just a little review here of what we had in the first part about Genesis 1:5. We determined that a Hebrew dictionary is needed. We need to compare and check if the English word that the translators in 1611 chose, if it was the best word or not. Oftentimes they could have chosen a better word, especially in English. We also found that there can be opposite definitions listed for the same word in any language. And we want to learn how to discern the correct content and the context of every verse so that we can select the proper definition for any word in the scripture. And we have to go back to the Hebrew to find out what are some of these original meanings. And we all know that Genesis 1:3 is the key verse for the day start when Yahuwah said, let there be light. That's where everything was starting to be restored again. But Genesis 1:5, it's a key verse. And it has definitions in this verse for day, night, evening, and morning twilights. And these definitions are not about when the day begins. They're just definitions so we know how to work with calendar. Genesis 1:5 has all components in the correct order for every 24-hour cycle. We're going to do a review of that here in just a little bit. And we also found out that the twilights are safeguards so that we never have to look to the sun for the day commencement. That is just an incredible, wonderful reason to have those twilights. So in Grammar 101, Part 2, we are going to be looking at these things. This will be the new part of this study. We're going to look at other definitions for day. In Part 1, we just went through the first definitions of day, night, evening, and morning. But in this here section tonight, we're going to look at other definitions for the word day. We're going to do some extra work on the word morning. This is brand new information. I think you'll find it interesting. And we're also going to do extra work on the word night. And this is going to include qualifiers. We've talked about qualifiers quite a few times. Now, morning and night only really have one definition. They don't have two or three that are opposites, but we're going to do some extra work here on morning and night. And then we need to do all of the other definitions for the word evening. We just really covered the first one last time. The next, we are going to do some extra work on primitive roots for the word evening. We're going to be focusing on the word evening quite a bit tonight because it is the cornerstone of covenant calendar teachings. Then we're going to look at between the evenings. We're going to look at singular and plural forms. I'll explain that later. And we will also look at the placements and the positions of this phrase between the evenings. And we won't be doing a full study here tonight, but this is a workup for what is coming here very soon on a revision for between the evenings. We just want to take a quick peek at the word evening if it is ever defined as afternoon, and that would be because we understand afternoons should certainly qualify for something about between the evenings. We want to look and see if the word evening does qualify as afternoon. And then in Part 3, we're going to look at the Day of Atonement portion from Leviticus 23, and we're going to do a very clear examination with this word evening. We know what it means now, so we want to check and see for Yom Kippur or Day of Atonement. Does evening begin Yom Kippur? So let's just get started with all of these sections. We've got quite a few of them to get through tonight. And section 1, like I said, is going to be the other definitions for day, which is Yom or 3117. The word day is often very confusing, a really confusing word, and it always needs to have careful consideration. And when you're sharing calendar studies with other people, you need to make sure this word defined very carefully with other people so that when you say day and you're meaning 12 hours, they're not thinking day means 24 hours. So we usually use the term day season to equal 12 hours for the light season. Of course, night season would be 12 hours of the night. And if we're using day for 24 hours, we will use day cycle, the cycle of the day. Okay, let's look at the first definition of the word day or Yom. This is a review, and this is what it said from the Strong's. It says, from an unused root, meaning to be hot, a day as the warm hours, where they're literal, and then Strong said from sunrise to sunset. But I have crossed it out because we understand that he didn't use the correct terms. Strong's, according to his own definitions for the words evening and morning, he should have said the 12 hours of the day from dawn to dusk. And that's according to the Hebrew definitions for morning and evening. Now, the second definition for day is the 24-hour cycle of the day season and the night season put together. And he continues on to say, from one sunset to the next. And you can see I crossed out one sunset to the next because Mr. Strong is incorrect again in calculating the commencement of the day with sunset. He should have said from one day break to the next. Now, we're not picking on Mr. Strong. I believe he was just influenced by the Messianic Jews or Jews in general, and didn't realize that he had the definitions for morning and evening 100% correct, but he didn't apply the definitions completely to understand how they work with the 12-hour day and the 24-hour cycle. The third definition that he lists is where one day will equal 1 year, and this is in a prophetic sense or a figurative, a figurative sense where you have figurative prophetic timelines or symbolic timelines versus literal timelines. And then you'll also find, if you go through the definitions, there's just a whole bunch of other definitions for day, like day of one's life, the day of Yahuwah, day of the second coming. There's all kinds of them, but they don't apply to calendar teaching. So tonight, we're mostly concerned with the first and second definition. And we're still working on a review here. The first usage of a word in the scriptures most often takes the first definition. So we just want to look through the column for light and day, and then the column for evening and morning. Under light for the day, the first time it's used is in Genesis 1:5. That's the first portion of the verse. And the first definition for light or for day is the warm hours, or remember, we're calling that the 12-hour day season. Light, or the Hebrew word is or, is called day. Light is called day. It's giving you a definition there, defining what light is called. The title is day. And the second use of day is given in the second part of Genesis 1:5, and that one aligns with the two twilights that links them to the day season. But I don't want you to forget that the first usage of a word in the scriptures most often takes the first definition. So for evening and morning, let's go through this little review. The very first usage that we find is in the last part of Genesis 1:5, and it's after the day season has been determined. The very first definition is correct as dusk for evening and dawn for morning. That is correct. And both of those terms are twilights. We did some work on that. Evening and morning have light, and they both belong to the day season. They do not belong to the night. So let's just review some charts for this information. We're still doing a review. The very first thing that Genesis 1:5 does, the first portion of the verse, is it's telling you about the two large components of the day. First, there's these two major divisions, and they're a whole 24-hour cycle that's divided in half. The first thing it mentions is the 12 hours of the day, and it's called light. And then it mentions the 12 hours of night, or the darkness is called night. The two large components that would include the 24-hour cycle. And notice that everything about the creation week starts right there with day and with light. It does not start with evening. It does not start with night. And then the last part of Genesis 1:5 goes on to talk about the two little sliver components that are also included in that 24-hour cycle. These twilight components are just small slivers of transition between the light and the night. The first one that is mentioned is evening twilight. The second one is mentioned as morning twilight. And evening twilight was placed 12 hours before the first morning twilight. And we also found that Genesis 1:5's order is correct. It goes day, evening, night, and morning. It is in the right order. Morning does not come before evening. So the proper order of all of these components is really easy when you just read it literally for what it says. Light came first. It was called day. The very next thing that came along was the evening twilight. Then night follows the evening, and after the night, along comes the morning twilight. And it comes at the very end of the 24-hour cycle, and it also begins the new day. In modern terms, Genesis 1:5, the last portion of Genesis 1:5 would read this way: and the dusk twilight and the dawn twilight belong to the day. They belong to the warm part or to the 12-hour day season, meaning they do not belong to the night. Also, this portion of the verse does not define when a day begins. It mostly just gives you the definitions of where these twilights belong. Took us a long time to figure that out. We're just finishing up on a review here. Night as compared to the twilight, and there's our little chart again. And we know that night is the absence of light from the sun. Of course, there's the stars that rule the night, but this is the absence of sunlight, okay? But twilight contains light. We know about that, and that's why twilights are reckoned as part of the day season or the day. They do not belong to the night. So that should be all clear now. We should have that down pat. I just wanted to share something that a brand new Dawn Day student shared with me yesterday. She said that she's enjoying the Dawn Day studies with a whole group of theirs, and they're starting to realize that there's a lot of crooked places that need to be straight. She sent me this verse, Isaiah 45:2, I will go before you and make the crooked places straight. And I think that this is something that we should not forget. Many are so reluctant to enter into a new calendar study because there's so much of a lingering controversy out there. People don't know. They hear calendar and they just get a headache. But it's really crucial to keep in mind that we need to prove all things from the scripture, no matter who taught us originally. And I still respect our leaders. They've done a lot of work. But we need to remember that maybe they didn't get everything 100% right. Our new Dawn Day friend said this: it is not disrespectful to learn that a prior teacher was mistaken. Scripture says the crooked places will be made straight. So by that she was saying that there is stuff that's been taught to us that's not correct. We need to figure out what it is. There's very few that have a clear path to Yahuwah's truth, but he tells us to study and grow in knowledge, and that's exactly what we had in Proverbs chapter 1 tonight. And one option is to be open-minded enough to accept that what you've been taught may not be correct, but then just go study out and make sure everything that you have been taught is correct according to Scripture as much as you know and understand. And you'll need some good study tools and study habits as well. First note that I would like to give to you is that the majority of festival calendars follow a sunset day commencement. We have found that out already. And there's another note that I don't want you to forget. Since Erev or evening is the cornerstone of the covenant calendar study, you need to have a thorough study that you can easily remove many questionable calendars. By just claiming that the day starts in the morning with light, you will remove a lot of questionable calendars. And it's just a good motivational boot to get started. There is good news because the study of covenant calendar might be easier than you realized with just a little bit of motivation. And we just hope that the calendar club will give you some of these studies so that you can enjoy them. So tonight, let's get started with section 2. This is going to be the new part. We've done our review. I want to do some extra work on the word morning. In Genesis 1:5, it is Boker. It's 12:42. And in Genesis 1, this word morning or Boker has basically just one definition. In the creation week, only one definition. Well, what is it? I wonder if you remember from last time. Morning or boker, it simply means this: dawn day. Break of day is exactly what it means. It does not mean that the evening breaks the day. It means that morning is. Boker is always morning twilight. Always. It is never anything else. And there are some other Hebrew words and numbers that we need to consider for the word morning. Now, I just went looking in the creation week and further on in the Old Testament to see where the word morning comes up. And I looked and found that in the Strong's, morning has 210 hits, approximately, using a total of 10 other Hebrew word numbers. I did not know this. So I'm thinking, why is there 10 other Hebrew word numbers for the word morning? I thought there was only one, and I thought it was boker. So I'm thinking maybe there's another word that should have been used in Genesis 1:5. Did the translators choose the right word or not? So a further look into these other Hebrew word numbers just might give us a clue as to why the word boker was used instead of another word for morning. In Genesis 1:3, let's remember Yahuwah said, "Let there be light." And here, or 2:16, is first defined as light for the 12-hour day season. And there's the definition for or. It simply says illumination, bright, clear, day, light, and morning. That's for let there be light. But you need to remember there was no twilight on that very first day. But the word morning, which is 7837 as shakar in Hebrew, also has the definition of dawn, break of day. And that means that shakar is also a twilight. Last year we had this question when we gave this study. Someone said, well, why doesn't Genesis 1:5 use shakar? And I didn't know at that time, but I know now. I want to share that with you tonight. So it is a very good question. Why isn't shakar used for Genesis 1:5 in place of boker, which is word number 1242? But first, before we do anything, we're going to go through these morning scriptures. I want to show you a little bit of how this works. We're going to look at 10 of them. The first one that comes up is boker, and it better be. And the first place that it shows up is at Genesis 1:5. But I want you to pay attention here. This word boker comes up in my Englishman's Concordance 215 times. So if I put in the word number 1242, it comes up 215 times, okay? But in Genesis 1:5, boker is what is used for morning, and it means literally the dawn, break of day. That's what it means. Then shakar comes up. I have these in order of books, the way that they come up in the Tanakh. 7837 shakar shows up next, and it's called morning in Genesis 19:15. It means literally or figuratively dawn, early light, or something that's rising. But when you put 7837 into Englishman's, you have it 25 times. Okay, we're going to have a question mark here for shakar. We're going to question that here in a bit. The very next number that comes up for morning is 7836. This is a primitive root. It is also shakar, but this primitive root shows up 12 times in the Englishman's. It comes in the book of Job 7:21, and look what it means. Dawn, to seek early, start a task early. So we want to look at these. The next word number that comes up for morning is 7925 shakam, And if you look up 7925 in your English means you'll have it there 65 times. But it comes up as the word morning in 1 Samuel 17:16. And this definition means to start early in the morning with a burden. So that's a little bit of something different than just how does the day start. This has got something to do with a burden. So we're not going to question that. Now look what we have. The fifth word number that comes up is 216, or. Remember, that's used in Genesis 1:3 for the word light. But the very first time that or comes up used as morning is in Nehemiah 8:3. And it means the forenoon of the day season. It does not mean dawn, twilight. Now, I want to show you that I have put Job up here following Genesis before Samuel. Because as I've said several times before, Job lived during the time of Abraham, and I really believe that Job is a Torah book. So I put him up there in slot number 3 instead of slot number 5. But we're going to now look at number 2 and number 3 and number 5 that have these question marks and see what's going on. Maybe Genesis 1:5 should have had another word number used. We have some questions around the word shakar. It came up first. And the question is, why isn't shakar now either 7837 or 7836, and it is a twilight? Why isn't shakar used for Genesis 1:5 in the place of boker, 1242, and that is also a twilight? Very first usage for 7837 is in Genesis 19:15. It says, "And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy 2 daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city." And the first time that 7836, it's also shakar, the first time it's used is in Job 7:21. And it says, "For now shall I sleep in the dust, and thou shalt seek me in the morning." It's 7836, "But I shall not be." What does this all mean? Let's look at the definition for shakar. 7837 is from 7836 because that's the primitive root. And it says dawn, literal or figurative or adverbial. And then it goes on to say day, day spring, early, light, morning, and whence rises. Do you see what is happening here? Do you see that shakar can be used as figurative, not just literal, but figurative? That's going to be a clue. Right there is your clue. That figurative is going to disqualify shakar as being used in Genesis 1:5 because morning in Genesis 1:5 is definitely literal. Let's look at some questions around the word or. Is or ever defined as morning for the dawn light or the break of day? And I'll give you the whole definition for or that is found in Genesis 1:3 for light. It's from 2:15, illumination or concrete. It's a luminary in every sense, including lightning, happiness. That would be something that is figurative. Something that is bright. It's a clear day, light, lightning, morning, and sun. Okay? The first usage of or as 216 in the morning is found in Nehemiah 8:3. And this is what it says. Really interesting verse. "And he," this is Nehemiah, "read therein before the street that was before the water gate from the morning," this is for light, "from the morning until midday before the men and the women." I wonder if you noticed something. Remember, this morning is 216, and it's actually equal to light up to the noon, the forenoon hours. But morning as boker is dawn, twilight. They're a little bit different, and we have to remember there was no twilight on the first day. So the definition of or gives confirmation of this. When Yah said, let there be light, it was the instant light that took you up to the midday. That was it. There was no twilight on the first day because or doesn't include twilight. I found that really interesting. Okay, we have 5 more to look at for these morning words. The next one that comes up is in Psalms 110, verse 3. It is 4891. It's mischar, and there's only one of these in the Englishman's. And it also means day breaking at dawn. And if you notice, it's from the primitive root 7836 shakar. Very similar. Here's an interesting one. Morning comes up as neshef. 5399, we've talked about this. It comes up as neshef, or neshef comes up as morning, first time in Psalms 119. And this is a breeze at dusk, morning, dawn, and twilight. This is the word neshef that we've been using for twilight. We're going to look at those first 2 and question them. The next one that comes up is 7904 shakah. It's called morning, and there's only one of those in the Englishman's, in Jeremiah, and it mostly means roaming through lust as morning roams in. So we won't be questioning that. It's got nothing to do with day commencement. 6843, Sephirah, comes up as the word morning in English in Ezekiel 7:7, but you'll find 6843 3 times in the Englishman's Concordance, and it means a turn of affairs as the night would turn into morning, is something where affairs are turning, just like night turns into morning. So that's got nothing to do with calendar. And the last one that comes up as the word morning is 5053. It's Noga. It's an Aramaic term. Comes up one time in Daniel 6:19, and it means dawn. But we won't be looking at it because it's Aramaic, and we're looking at the Hebrew. So let's question mischar and neshef after this, and let's look and see. So some questions around mischar, or question number 3 is, why isn't mischar 4811, which is a twilight, why isn't that word used instead of boker in Genesis 1:5? We asked that question of shakar, remember? And there's the definition for mischar. It says it's from 7836. Maybe you remember that's a primitive root for shakar. In the sense of the day breaking, dawn, or at the morning. I wonder if you know what the answer is going to be. There's only one usage of this word as the word morning. It's found in Psalms 110, verse 3. This is what it says. Thy people shall be willing in the day of thy power, in the beauties of holiness, from the womb of the morning. Thou hast the dew of thy youth. Do you notice the womb of the morning? That's basically a figurative expression. So mischar is not used in Genesis 1:5 because it needs to avoid the possible link to a figurative dawn rather than the literal boker. Remember, that said figurative. If you remember, we had that. So that one gets disqualified. Mischar can't be used. Boker is still right. Well, what are some questions around neshef for the twilight? Why isn't neshef used? It's a twilight. Why didn't Hebrew use neshef instead of boker in Genesis 1:5? And this is the definition from the Strong's. Properly a breeze. Do you remember this? By implication, dusk was the first definition. It says when the evening breeze prevails. The breezes usually come up at dusk. And then it says dark. And then we have a second definition of dawning of the day or the morning. And then night is also used here for neshef, and twilight. So this is a definition for twilights, but dusk comes before dawn. There's only one usage of neshef that is used as the word morning instead of twilight. In Psalms 119, 147, it says, I prevented the dawning of the morning, and I cried, and I hoped in thy word. Remember, the very first definition of neshef is dusk. And in Genesis 1:5, morning is a dawn twilight. So there's no way that neshef could have been used in Genesis 1:5 because you would have looked at the first definition, which is dusk, and that would have disqualified morning. So neshef doesn't qualify for boker. What is our conclusion on morning and boker as we finish up this section? Boker is the absolute best Hebrew word that could have been used in Genesis 1:5, where it says, and the morning, because it means first and foremost the morning twilight at the break of day. Boker never, ever, ever means the light of forenoon after sunrise to noon. Boker is always the morning twilight. It is never used as a figurative application of the dawn twilight, like shakar and mishkar can be used, and boker is never to be confused with the generic definition of neshef or twilight that can also mean dusk. It's really interesting. If you go and look at all of the scriptures and read them for yourself, you'll see it's really, really clear. I didn't want to put it all in. We would have been here all night. But that finishes up section number 2 on morning. We're going to do a similar exercise on the word night. It's Lael in Genesis 1:5. It's 3915. And again, in Genesis 1, the word night has basically just one definition. It's a really easy definition, just a basic definition. Lael is just a twist away of the light. That's all it is. It's just a simple definition. But when I went looking at the word night, I found that there were other word numbers that were used for night as well. So I thought we better check this out. Did Hebrew use the right word? Was Lael the best one to use in the creation week, especially the first day? Well, in Strong's, if you punch in night, you will find 245 hits using a total of 9 Hebrew word numbers. Okay, there's 9, but I'm only going to do 8 tonight. So let's take a closer look at all of them and just see if Lael is really the best word to be using for Genesis 1:5. Night. There was 245 scriptures. Well, Lael is the first one that comes up. And if you put 3915 into the Englishman's, you'll get 233 hits. You can look at all of them. But in Genesis 1:5, Lael means a twist away of the night. It is the night season. The very next time that light is used, night, not light, night, is used is 3885 in Genesis 19:2. It's the word lum. And that word number comes up 83 times in the Englishman's. And it means a stop overnight for the night season. It has nothing to do with a calendar study. It's just stopping overnight. This is an interesting number. It comes up the third time, 6153. It's a rev. In Genesis 49:27, the definition for a rev is dusk and day and night. But this word comes up as night in Genesis 49:27. We're going to do a lot of work on the word evening later on, and you should all know that the first definition is dusk. So how is this being used as the word night? We're going to question that one. The next number that comes up is found in Leviticus 11:6. It's 8464. You'll find this number 2 times in the Englishman's. It's takmak. I need somebody with Hebrew. And it's an unclean bird or a night hawk. It has nothing to do with calendar. But let's check out the 6153, our question. Our questions around Erev. And question number 1 is, Erev dusk, which is 6153. It does list night as its last definition. This is a review from the first time around. It says from 6150, which first definition is dusk, and then the King James goes on to say day, even, or evening, or eventide, and then at the very end it lists night for the word evening, or rev. Very interesting. And lots of people say, how can night link to evening? or how can Lael link to a rev? These are different numbers, 3915 and 6153. The very first usage of a rev as 6153, when it's using the word night instead of evening, is in Genesis 49:27. And it says, Benjamin shall raven as a wolf in the morning, and that is 12:42. That is the dawn twilight. So Benjamin shall raven as a wolf in the morning, dawn twilight. He shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. But the word number is a rev, 6153, and the first definition is dusk. So he's saying that at dusk, which is twilight towards the night, he shall divide the spoil. I found this really interesting because what I'm finding here is that night is referring to dusk, and it's a complement to when it says morning. This morning, 12:42, is always a dawn twilight. So it's using the word night here as a qualifier, let's say, towards comparing it with morning, the morning, dawn, twilight. But it's probably closer to the darkness of the night than just the beginning of the twilight. We're going to be considering morning as the qualifier here. It tells you how to understand the word night as the dusk twilight and not Lael. Other questions around a rev? I started to ask, are there other places where night links to evening as 6153? And yes, there was. In the following verses, the dawn morning is part of the context as a qualifier, and the word night links to dusk as a complement. There were only 3 verses. We did one already, but here's the other 2, and you'll see it when you read it. Job 7:4 says, when I lie down, I say, when shall I arise and the night be gone? It's 6153. 6153. And I am full of tossings to and fro until the dawning of the day. So that's why night is used, because it's referring to the evening twilight in comparison to the dawning of the day. It looks like a qualifier there. If this would have said or, this probably would have been Lael night. Psalms 30 verse 5, it says, weeping may endure for a night. It's a rev, 6153. But guess what? Joy cometh in the morning. And that is 12:42. That means dawn twilight. So it appears that they use night to mean the evening twilight as a complement to the morning twilight. Leviticus 6:20 also has a little bit of information. This is the offering of Aaron and his sons. Half of it in the morning, it's 12:42, so that's dawn twilight, and half thereof at night. And it uses the word 6153, a rev, which is dusk, and that's the dusk that goes towards the night. That has to do with the sacrifices. So again, I found in all of these verses that night is referring to dusk, to the dusk sacrifice as a complement to the dawn sacrifice. And you'll see that. It was in all of the verses. It was exactly the same. It was never referring to or as the light from the forenoon, from the rising of the sun to high day. So if you just start snooping around, you'll find some things. The next one that came up was really interesting. It's 28:22, koshek. We need Tim to say it in Hebrew, Hebrew accent. And 28:22 comes up 80 times in the Englishman's. But the very first time that koshek comes up as night instead of darkness, okay, that's how it's translated in Genesis 1:2 is as darkness, and it means this. Literally first is darkness, and then these are the rest of the definitions for 28:22, koshek. Destruction, death, wickedness, and obscurity. We're going to question that one. The next one that comes up is 8:21, Ashmurah. 7 times you'll find this number in the Englishman's, but it comes up as the word night in Psalms 63:6, and it means a night watch, to guard, a night watch. So that's got nothing to do with calendar. We won't be looking into that further. Oh, look what we have next. 5399. Neshef comes up again. Remember, Neshef came up as being used for morning. Well, it's coming up here as being used for night. First time in Isaiah 21:4, it's used as night. And remember, Neshef is a dusk twilight until dusk is night. We'll question that one as well. Number 956, Booth. It's Aramaic, comes up one time in the Englishman's, and it's in Daniel 6:18. It simply means to lodge overnight, has nothing to do with calendar. But we do want to look at Koshek and Neshef and how they relate to night. But your homework is to check out Jonah 4:10. I'm not going to go there tonight. I think you can do it all by yourself after seeing this little section. So, some questions around Koshek. How can night, layout 3915, be linked to the Koshek darkness, which is 28:22, and this word first comes up in Genesis 1:2, the first part of the verse. It comes up as darkness. But the first usage of night as Koshek comes up in Job 26:10. It says, he hath compassed the waters with bounds until the day, this is 2:16, it's or, the daylight, and the night, this is darkness, come to an end. This darkness of 28:22 is a very, very dense darkness. I believe that the night is referring here to an abyss darkness. It's a complete opposite of the day, the daylight during the 12 hours of the sunshiny day. Absolute opposites here. So night is referring to an abyss darkness, and the day refers to light. It does not refer to the day season. More questions around Neshef. Why isn't Neshef, twilight, used for Genesis 1:5 in place of Lael when you have it there, or night, 3915? Let's look and see. Our review here for Neshef, we already had that earlier. It properly means it's a breeze. That usually happens at dusk. Dusk is your first definition for Neshef, which is twilight in English, and when the evening breeze prevails. When it's dark, and then the second definition is dawning of the day, and of course it takes you up to the night, and it does mean twilight. But the first usage of Neshef as night is in Isaiah 21:4. My heart panted, fearfulness affrighted me. The night, this is your twilight, the night of my pleasure hath he turned into fear unto me. The context of this verse is Cyrus, as he's going to overthrow Babylon, and this was at the night, or the 5399 dusky part of the night of that 24-hour cycle. And you can also look at Isaiah 5:11 and 59:10 for similar examples. So we are finished with our night, and what are the conclusions? I found that Lael, which is 3915 for night, is the absolute best word that could have been used for Genesis 1:5, as it means, first and foremost, the night season once the light has twisted away. There's not one of the other Hebrew words that can offer the correct definition or context for the use of night, Lael, which is 3915, in the creation week. It was the absolute best word. So I'm totally happy that morning, Boker, and night, Lael, were used in Genesis 1:5. Okay, we're ready to start working on section number 4. And we want to look at these other definitions for the word evening, or Erev, which is 6153. And in Genesis 1, the word Erev first refers to dusk, that evening twilight. But Erev has other noun definitions besides the word evening. Understanding evening, this very first definition, this is a review from our first Grammar 101. The first definition, it's a mixing of light and night, or just simply, it's a dusk twilight. But there are two new noun definitions that are going to include, guess what? The day season and the night season. This is really interesting. Evening, if I have to say it a dozen times tonight, is the cornerstone of the covenant calendar. You need to understand evening. So we're going to look at the section, it says day. And at this point, many question why day is ever listed as a definition for the word evening that actually means dusk, twilight. And people are saying, why is the word day there? And trust me, we have asked it too. Well, because day seems to be opposite of the term evening. That's why they're asking. Day doesn't seem like evening to me. Or they'll say, well, evening is defined as the mixing of light and night. Is that why it's part of the day? Well, there's some other things. Evening is not the day, but it is part of the day season. That is something that we need to remember. And coming up in just a little bit, we're going to look at, excuse me, an examination of the phrase between the evenings that also qualifies for the day season. So just kind of tuck that on the back burner for right now. There are two more definitions in the Strong's Concordance. The third definition for erev is evening or eventide. It's just an old English term that really means dusk, twilight. And the fourth definition comes up as night. And so again, people are saying, does night sound like the definition for evening if evening is supposed to be a dusk, twilight? So why is the word night there as part of the definition for the word evening? And they say because night is very different from evening, and because evening is not part of the night season. We all know that. There is no light in the night season. So why is the word night there to define evening? And this is the new part that's coming up. We're going to have another examination of this phrase between the evenings that does qualify for the night season. So how is evening or erev going to link to night? We're going to look at that. So here they are, the four definitions for evening. The first one is dusk. Then the second one is listed as day. The third one is eventide, same as dusk, twilight. And the fourth one is night. And I want you to note, because so many say that the day begins with sunset. Sunset, or shemesh bo, is not one of the definitions for the word evening. Sunset is a point of time that ushers in the evening, or it ushers in erev. When you look up sun, it's 8121, it's shemesh, and it means to be brilliant, like the sun. And going down is 935, that's bo, and that's a primitive root, and it means to go or to come. So it can mean for the sun to come up or the sun to go down. It can mean, shemesh bo can mean either way. And evening, as 6153, is not the same as sunset, because 6153 is not the same as 8121 or 935. Shemesh bo is a completely different term. And just like you to write down Exodus 16:23, when Moses said that the Shabbat was going to start tomorrow, he did not say, he said at Makar, he did not say, or no, I'm not so sure. I think I'm got a brain fog there, but he says tomorrow. He does not say shemesh bo or at sunset. So that's a really interesting little thing to remember. So the question is, do you ever wonder why there's so much emphasis on evening in the covenant calendar study? And we've said it before, and we'll say it again. Evening is the trickiest, the most challenging term to understand correctly, and it is covenant calendar's cornerstone. So always remember that. We're going to do some extra work on the word evening in section number 5, because we're going to look at some primitive roots of this word 6153 erev. And it's really interesting because evening goes back to 2 primitive roots. A lot of words have only 1 primitive root, but this word has 2. The first mention of evening, like I said, is in Genesis 1:5, and the 2 primitive roots that need to be considered are going to follow when you read the definitions. It says erev from 6150, that's your first primitive root, We already know the definitions of dusk, day, evening tide, and night. So let's look at 6150. Rev up here, Lael, is the noun. This is now going to be the verb. We always have nouns and verbs that work together. 6150 is a rav. It's a little bit different than a rev. It says a primitive root. And then it says identical with 6148 through the idea of covering with a texture. And look what it means: to grow dusky at sundown, be darkened toward evening. Let's look at 6148. It is also a verb, is exactly the same word, pronounced the same way, okay? But it is a different primitive root. Is primitive root number 2. To braid, to intermix, and to mingle. Meddling, lots of things, lots of other kinds of definitions, but I'm using the definitions tonight that would link to a calendar study. So our question is, why are there 2 primitive roots for the word evening? And I had to think, why does evening get 2 primitive roots? And then I thought, well, there's 2 twilights in every 24-hour cycle. Could that have something to do with it? And both of those primitive roots are named exactly the same word, ara. They've got 2 different numbers. So I said, why are there 2 primitive roots? I don't understand. Let's take a little bit of a look. 6150 is the first one that comes up, the first primitive root that comes up, and it is a verb. It aligns with the evening twilight. Remember, it said it was identical with 6148. And also remember, it says here to grow dusky at sundown, to be darkened toward the evening. Just leaving that there for a review. There's dusk, and here is dusky. Do you see how the rev, the noun, is connecting with 6150, the verb arab, between the words dusk and dusky? There's a connection here. But we need to look at 6148 because duskiness can be described with 6148, the second primitive root. When it says to braid and to intermix and to mingle, this is all duskiness, or it's a mixing. But there is another description as well. And we're going back to the word twilight or neshef, where we have dusk again, but we also have the word dawn, but we're looking at a rev right now, the dusk. So here we've got dusk and dusky. We know that we've got braiding and intermixing, braiding of light and night, mingling of light and night, mixing of light and night. So this is how these primitive roots work together. Let's compare 6148 Arav and see if it might align with the morning twilight. We have morning as dawn, the break of day, and we know that Boker is always morning twilight. It never ever qualifies for morning from sunrise to noon. And we're looking at twilight neshef again. The second definition is the dawning of the day. We know that twilight is always a mixing, okay, whether it's dusk or dawn. So how would morning and twilight align with Arav 6148? We have this verb. It's a braiding and an intermixing, mingling or meddling as well. And don't forget that 6148 is going to define any kind of mixing that's out there, including the Boker twilight. It doesn't define only the dusk mixing, but also the Boker mixing. But it can also define mixing of insects, the mixing of cool air and warm air, the mixing of different kinds of races of people. Any kind of mixing that's out there, 6148 defines every other kind of mixing. 6150 defines mostly the dusk at twilight, the dusky after sundown. But I want you to watch for one more condition. We're going to put this all together now between these two primitive roots, 6150 and 6148. They're both a Rav. But we're going to do evening or a Rev on this column as the noun. And over here we'll work with morning and boker as a noun. We're going to work with them and their verb components. Evening is a twilight mixing of light and night, and so is morning. Morning is a twilight mixing of night and light. Evening is a twilight at the end of the light season, and morning is a twilight at the beginning of the light season. So what we have here is that we have evening with a Rav. This is your Arab verb mixing here. That's your 6150. And morning, bakar. Bakar is the primitive root for morning. It's 1239. That would be your verb mixing for morning, would be bakar. Let's keep going. In evening, the verb is the dusky mixing. For the morning, the verb is actually going to say plow, to break forth. And that is a mixing, isn't it? When you plow the land, you're digging down the dirt from beneath and it's coming up to the top and it's mixing and it's breaking forth the morning. This is the crux of this section. A Rav, as 6148, is the verb for all mixings and twilights, for every kind of them, okay? So now let's look and see. We have evening, which is a Rev in Hebrew. It qualifies for the Arab dusky mixing, which is 6150, because when we looked it up, it said dusky at sundown. Let's look at morning. Morning or bakar is going to qualify for Arab as well, but it will be the 6148 because that is a general mixing. So if we want to define this in Hebrew, it would be Erev, Arab. This would mean evening mixing, evening dusky mixing at sundown. And the morning would be defined as Boker Arab, the morning, dawn, twilight, general mixing in the morning. So I hope you can hang on to that as we go into this next section, because you might be wondering, this seems really confusing to me. Where could all this be leading to? And are there any good answers? Well, there is. And I think it's time that we check another lexicon and look for the next piece of information. It's just some basics of a Rev and the primitive roots. And this is going to be from Parkhurst. You know that Tim has used this lexicon quite a bit. And there are the Hebrew letters, okay? He doesn't say a Rev and a Rav. He just says this: besides the definitions of mix and mingle, to be darkened and duskily obscured, Parkhurst is also going to include a phrase that looks like this. And I wish somebody could tell me what it means, because I'm going to tell you next. He goes on to say that this phrase means between the evenings, ben har RBM. RBM is plural for a Rav. Or more literally, it means between the mixtures. That's what Parkhurst has to say. So he doesn't separate it out by word numbers or anything like that. He's just saying that this mixing is going to include between the evenings. And I was beginning to wonder if this had anything to do with nouns and verbs. Well, let's take a look. What we're doing here now is going to be an introduction to the new teaching on between the evenings. There it is, Ben Har RBM. Read it from right to left. This part is ben, between. Right here, the, and this is RBM. The mixture is RBM. There's a Rev right there. Okay, we're going to be doing a lot more work on this coming up on a new PowerPoint. But question number one is, how many evenings or Revs are there in 24 hours? And question number two is, how many mixtures or how many Arabs are there in 24 hours? We're going to take a look in our next section. because we're going to look at the phrase between the evenings using a Rev 6153 and a Rav 6148. Going to be a comparison of tenses of singular and plural. A Rev would be the singular, a Rav is the plural. I think you can remember that. It's not too hard. So a Rev as the noun and a Rav as the verb. This is all brand new. Many definitions for a Rav are descriptive action words. Remember, that's what a verb does. It describes an action. And every Rev twilight is an a Rav mixing. And a Rev is your noun, a Rav is your verb. Let's look at morning or boker. That's the noun, and it also identifies a mixing. It's a mixing of light, which is a noun, and it mixes with night. That's a noun as well. But when you have a Rav, and when you apply it to the morning or to the boker, that's describing the mixing of light and darkness in the morning. This mixing is your action, right? That's your Rav. And note that every boker is an Rav, but only if there is a qualifier. There has to be a qualifier to tell you it's a Rav. So we want to look at nouns and verb tenses and how they work together. We have a Rev evening twilight, and that's going to be working with 6150 singular, a Rav mixing. This is just one mixing. And then we have boker morning twilight, but it can work with 6148, which is the word for different kinds of mixing. This word can include the dusk mixing and the dawn mixing. Okay, so this is where the morning twilight would fit in. We have a chart here. There's your morning boker, dawn's first light. And then we have morning action is being described as the Rav twilight mixture. That would come after your first light. Then you have your sunrise. You have direct sunlight for your hot hours of the day until you have your sunset. You all know what comes next. It's the Rev evening action, but it's an Rav twilight mixture. It's the Rav. And then you have your darkness, and we finish off with our dawn twilight. The next boker begins the new cycle. The morning boker twilight qualifies for this 6148. It's a plural, a Rav mixing, and it's only going to qualify with this phrase, between the evenings. I have this S in a capital S because it's very special, this word evenings. So let's go into the next section where we can try to understand the placement of between the evenings. What's happening with this term is very controversial, and a lot of people use this term to determine that the day begins with evening. We're going to look at a little bit something different tonight. We will expand this on the PowerPoint of between the evenings. So we want to understand that a Rav, this is the second primitive root, 6148, is paramount for clarity on this phrase, between the evenings. The singular form of evening, or a Rev, rightly claims the first definition as dusk, and that's the mixing of light and night, and it is always dusk twilight. Every single time it's going to be dusk twilight. Evening can only claim the second definition of day or the fourth definition of night, where both components consist of no mixing. But that's only if there's a qualifier. We will do a lot of examples of this in a couple of weeks. What is that qualifier? I'll just give you two little clues here. The context is going to be first qualifier in the scriptures. You have to figure out the context. And the second qualifier is going to be this term has to be found in the context between the evenings. You have to find that term. You can't just use any term that says a Rev. It has to be between the evenings. One qualifier is when the verb form of a rev changes from singular to plural. Instead of only a rev in the verse, the plural form of a rev, which is a rob or area bim, is present in this phrase, ben har rbm, or in English, it's between the evenings. So the plural form of a rev, as ben ha rbm, or between the evenings, we're going to look at that. There is only one evening in every 24-hour cycle. Remember, we asked the question, how many evenings are there in a 24-hour cycle? There is only one evening, there is only one dusk twilight in every 24-hour cycle. And it is amazing the gymnastics that some people go to prove to you that there are two evenings in a 24-hour cycle. It's absolutely amazing. But the question is, how can there be two evenings in any 24-hour cycle? Because a lot of people teach that. Or is it this way? Would there be two mixings in any 24-hour cycle or in all 24-hour cycles? Would that be more like it? Well, let's take a look as we're going to demonstrate this next. It is true that every 24-hour cycle has two aravs. We have a Boker morning arav mixing, and we have an Erev evening arav mixing. And this is where this phrase comes in, between the mixings, or between, it's called evenings. It would have been better if it was between the mixings. Okay, we're back to our chart. We have our dawn day that starts right here, and our morning boker, which is an arav, the morning arav mixing. We have our sunrise, and our sunset comes after our direct sunlight. Direct sunlight. And then right here, we have our very first between the mixings. It's in the day season. That's your first one. Then you have an evening arav, or an evening mixing. And after that's over with, you have your dawn. But guess what? Right here, from darkness to the dawn, you have your second mixing that includes the night season. So you can have a ben ha rbm that is during the day, and you can have one that's during the night. Now, we used to think it was always just during the day, but now we know that there are times when you have a between the mixing that includes the night season. That's why I'm saying we need to look at the content and the context of every set of scriptures to know exactly what's going on. Context determines the specific between the mixings. Is the context going to say it's in the day season or in the night season? You can't just assume it's always day season. This phrase, Ben Har RBM, is so unique. There's a total of 11 Torah scriptures that use the phrase. They're all in the Torah. This phrase is only used in the Torah, and we're going to break this open big time in the teaching on between the evenings. That'll be coming up in a couple of weeks. So we're all finished with section 7. We're going to look at section 8. This is really short. Is evening ever defined as afternoon? It's Natah 5186 in the Hebrew. Is afternoon a definition for the term between the evenings? We need to ask that too, because afternoon is definitely during the day season. Remember that evening can have these opposite definitions. Day and night are definitely opposites, and they're opposites of dusk as well. But I would like you to note that the second and the fourth definitions for evening can be used to mean any part of the day season or the night season. But you have to have a qualifying phrase between the evenings, or Ben RBM. That phrase has to be present, and the context has to be carefully considered so that you know where it belongs. Or it can happen if there is divine intervention. That's a possibility as well. But I'm here to tell you that evening never takes the definition of an afternoon time without a qualifying verse. It does not happen. Well, I went and looked up the word afternoon, And it's used only one time in the King James Version by that word. It's in Judges 19:8. And it says, "And he arose early in the morning," and morning is 12:42. That's Boker or dawn twilight. "He arose early at the dawn twilight on the 5th day to depart. And the damsel's father said, Comfort thine heart, I pray thee. And they tarried until afternoon, and they did eat." This is natah. Well, the definition of natah from the Strong's, it says to stretch or to spread out, to bend away, to bow down, to decline, to go down, to stretch or to stretch forth. And I would just like you to note that the shadows of the light of the day really do begin to stretch and spread out and bend away, and they do go down in the afternoon. And that's when the sun passes the meridian until the shadows are overtaken by the dusk. But when you compare afternoon, natah, which is 5186, with evening or rev, and that's word number 6153, we find that these two Hebrew words are not related at all. They don't have the same Hebrew roots, nothing close at all, and they're not close in phonetics. Natah and arev are not close. Remember tohu and bohu. Sometimes when the words rhyme, they are close in definition or definitions, yes. And they are not the same through the first definitions. Afternoon and dusk do not have the same definitions. So that means that between the evenings does not always mean afternoon. It just isn't there. It's only used one time in the King James. Okay, we are ready to go into part 3 of Grammar 101, and this is going to be an examination of the term even to even. In Leviticus 23:32, it's actually the last part of this verse. And this whole passage of verses is about Yom Kippur or Day of Atonement. I use those terms interchangeably. And the question is, will the reference of even to even begin Yom Kippur at dusk? Now, there are some people that do believe that the day begins in the morning, but they say when it comes to Yom Kippur or Day of Atonement, that's different. Day of Atonement starts in the evening, not in the morning. So for understanding this phrase from Leviticus 23:32, from even unto even shall you celebrate your Sabbath, we want to figure out for sure if evening here means that we're starting our Yom Kippur at the dusky part of the day, the night before. And does even to even really mean sunset to sunset in this passage? We've done some work on Yom Kippur before, 2 or 3 times before, but we'll delve into it a little bit more tonight. There are over 35 scripture witnesses that the day begins at dawn, and they're all easy to do. You can understand them really, really easy with proper study skills. It's a lot of witnesses, but there are 4 scriptures that are very controversial, that are always used to distort when the day begins. And I call it sunset distortions. There's 2 of them are going to be found in the Torah. We've already done this one, Genesis 1:5, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And please remember, this is not telling you when the day begins. This is not a phrase that tells you when the day begins. It's a phrase that tells you that the evening and the morning belong to the day. They do not belong to the night. These are definitions, not when does something commence. There are 2 non-Torah usages that people use to start the day in the evening. It's Nehemiah and his gates. In Nehemiah 13:19, it says, when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath. This is a really popular one. We'll probably do this eventually in the future. One is from the Gospels. It's John 20, verse 1. We've already done studies on this. When the first day of the week came, Mary Magdalene was there early. When it was yet dark, she came unto the sepulchre. We won't be delving into these 2 tonight. We are going to look at Leviticus 23:32, the last 9 words. From even unto even shall you celebrate your Sabbath. This is one that is used a lot. to determine that not only Day of Atonement Sabbath, but every Sabbath starts at dusky twilight. And it is a challenge for a lot of people. So let's just make up a scenario here. Just say that you've invested a lot of time and effort to understand that the day start begins at the morning, and you've looked at the first and second days of creation, and you know what? You can even explain it really, really well. And then along comes your Sabbath pastor, and he's not really too interested in your new understanding. And remember, he comes across like he knows it all. And the next thing you hear from him is these words, but you know, from even unto even you shall celebrate your Sabbath, and evening means sunset. Well, you certainly know all about even from your Genesis 1 study, but you really weren't prepared how to answer that challenge from even unto even. But you know what? Scripture has an easier answer than you think. And all you have to do is follow those simple rules. So in this section, we're going to learn how to understand exactly when Yom Kippur or Day of Atonement begins and what to do with these other mandated requirements that are given in the passage. And don't forget, Grammar 101 study is a foundation. Remember all those study skills. It has the study skills there for a reason, so that you can know the definition of evening beyond a shadow of a doubt. Day of Atonement is one of these controversial scriptures, and it is used to demand that the Sabbath begins the evening at sunset. And I hear it still today. And even, like I said, some of the dawn keepers are saying only one exception, Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur begins at sunset. No other one, just that one. So you have to answer that as well. And why is this? Because most of us have been taught that the word even means some sunset. But we already looked at the definitions of evening, and it didn't have sunset in there. So of the highest importance, read more than 9 words to discern the context. If you count the words in the passage of Day of Atonement in Leviticus 23, I think it's around 180 words. And most people just read the last 9 words and they forget to read the first 170. So I want you to remember your basics from Genesis 1. I want you to remember that we have to read the content judiciously, and we're going to do that right now tonight. We're going to read in context extremely carefully. We're going to make sure we're not taking anything out of context. And so far, we know that enough investigation has already happened and completed on the word evening that we should be able to solve this Day of Atonement problem or puzzle really easy. There shouldn't be any troubles whatsoever, because we know that the first day of creation began with light, and it wasn't a twilight. Remember, the word or is light from the forenoon up to the high day. And we also learned that every day since the first day of creation begins with light of dawn, Boker. But people say, what about Day of Atonement? Isn't that the most solemn day of the year? Shouldn't that day really tell us when the day begins? Well, yeah, it should. But we know that in Leviticus 23:32, the Torah proof that every Day of Atonement and every weekly Sabbath, some say it begins with the dusk of evening at sunset. You know, and it's really hard to convince these people otherwise. They need to look at the word evening in great detail. And they say this even if the context is only for Day of Atonement. They take out the other Sabbaths that don't belong there anyway, but they say just for Day of Atonement. So in order to understand Leviticus 23:32, these last 9 words, we have to examine the full context of this passage from verses 26 to 32 for what it's saying about the 10th day of the 7th month, that's Day of Atonement, and what it says for the 9th day of the 7th month, because there's something special happening there. And we need to do all of that to understand what these words really mean. When it says, in the 9th day of the month, at even, from even unto even, shall you celebrate your Sabbath. But I want to note right here that this passage is going to speak about an affliction of one's soul. And in the study tonight, we are not addressing what that affliction is. We are only going to address when it is to begin and when it has to end. But there's 3 strict requirements. I would like you to pay attention to Yahuwah's 3 strict requirements for Day of Atonement. And here's the reason why. He is very specific in this passage. All 3 of these are repeated 3 times so that you don't miss it. The other thing is I want you to know where these requirements are found. I'm going to give you a review at the end, and I'm going to point it out, but just take note where they're coming up. And then as we're going through these requirements, I want you to keep in mind, is this happening on the 9th day or the 10th day? And we're going to examine the Day of Atonement verses really carefully. And I want you to remember that Day of Atonement is not going to change from the 10th day of the month to the 9th day of the month, because Yahuwah doesn't change. So we're going to look at this passage in great detail. It starts out in verse 26. And Yahuwah spake unto Moses, saying, I'm going to have the content of the verse on the left side, and I'm going to give the context of the verse on the right side. In this verse, a command is being given to Moses, and it's going to be regarding the Day of Atonement, as we'll see next. He says in verse 27, also on the 10th day of the 7th month, there shall be a Day of Atonement. It shall be a holy convocation unto you, and you shall afflict your souls, and an offering is to be made by fire unto Yahuwah. So I've broken this up into 4 sections. Let's look at the first section. The 10th day of the month is giving you the date. Exactly that. It's very specific. It's the first mention for Day of Atonement, and it is the 10th day. And we already know that Genesis 1 declares the commencement moment for this day as dawn twilight. It's not going to be in the evening. Where it says this shall be a Day of Atonement, here it's telling us the name of the day. It is Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. It's going to be a special celebration, and this is the second mention of Day of Atonement, and it still is on the 10th day. There's been no indication to change it. And then it says it shall be a holy convocation. This is a holy Sabbath. It is a 7676. It's the exact same number as a weekly Sabbath. And this is the 3rd mention for Day of Atonement. It's still on the 10th day. We are also looking at the very first requirement for observation. There's 3 requirements. This is the first one that's mentioned, afflict your souls. And I'm putting here that this is the first mention of 3. And then it says to offer an offering by fire. This is the 3rd requirement. It's sacrifices. We're going to come to the 2nd requirement on the next slide, and we're not going to address the sacrifices because they've been done away with. So we will be looking at the 1st and 2nd requirements that need to be done to observe Day of Atonement. In verse 28, it says, and you shall do no work in that same day, for it is a Day of Atonement, to make an atonement for you before Yahuwah your Elohim. Let's look at the context. Here we have our 2nd requirement for observation. You shall do no work. And this is the first mention of 3. But it also says it's the same day. So that's your 4th mention for Day of Atonement. It's the same day, and it's on the 10th. I should have asked you to guess in your mind, how many times do you think Day of Atonement is going to be addressed here in the context of these verses, these 180 words? This is number 4. And number 2, for part B, for it is a Day of Atonement, the context is still Day of Atonement, and we have the 5th and 6th mention here for Day of Atonement on the 10th. It is the 5th, and Day of Atonement is the 6th mention. And to make an atonement, well, the purpose is atonement for man's sins. We sure need that. Looking at verse 29, it says, for whatsoever soul it be that shall not be afflicted in that same day, he shall be cut off from the people. Well, what is the context for verse 29? We're back to our first requirement, which was afflict your soul. It was mentioned first, but this is the second mention out of 3 that it's being emphasized here. And that same day, okay, it's talking about the Day of Atonement, or the 10th day of the month. And what if you don't do this? What if you don't afflict your soul? Well, the consequence for disobedience to this first requirement is that you're not going to be part of the genealogy of the Messiah. That's really what it means. You weren't going to be struck dead, but you would be cut off from the people, and your family would not be in line for the genealogy. That was what everybody wanted, okay? So you don't get that favor. In verse 30, the content of our verse, and whatsoever soul it be that doeth any work in that same day, the same soul will I destroy from among his people. And here we go. This is the second requirement that had to be observed. Shall do no work. And this is the second mention of 3 that it's being mentioned. But look at, it says that same day. So we have our 8th mention of Day of Atonement, and it's still the 10th day of the month. I have somebody whistling and playing something. I don't know what it is, but on slide 79, maybe Mario can help us out there. Thank you. So we're going to go to the second part of verse 30, where it says, the same soul I will destroy from among his people. If you don't keep this second requirement, the consequence for disobedience is that you will be destroyed. Well, it sounded a little more serious than disobeying the first requirement of no affliction. Let's look at verse 31. It says, you shall do no manner of work. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. Let's look at the context of the verse. 2 times in a row is talking about no work. So our second requirement is being addressed. And this is the third mention of 3 that this is being emphasized. So that's our 3 for no work. It says it is talking about the 9th mention for Day of Atonement, no work on the 10th day of the month. And that's a statute that you're to observe forever. So guess what? On Day of Atonement, you don't need to do any work. In fact, you're supposed to be just quiet. Now we're ready to look at something else before we finish the last part. Have you been observant, and have you noticed how many times Day of Atonement has been emphasized thus far for the 10th day of the 7th month? So far, 9 times. It's quite a bit. Yahuwah has mentioned Day of Atonement as the 10th day enough times so that you can know what the context is. There should be absolutely no question about that. And there's no reason to doubt what the requirements are for this extremely important day. However, another day is going to be mentioned very soon. And the question is, why is another day going to be mentioned? We're coming up to the last verse. The content starts out with the word it. It. That happens to be talking about the same day as all the other verses. It is the 10th day of the 7th month. This is the 10th mention for Day of Atonement on the 10th of Tishrei. It says, it shall be unto you a Sabbath of rest. And the context, the Sabbath of rest, and it's the 11th mention of this 10th day of the month. It's referring to Day of Atonement. That's what the context is. Now, right here, we're going to have a slight change of context because our context is going to move from Day of Atonement to affliction. It's not going to move the Day of Atonement to another day. It's moving to another topic. And I think it would have been really good if the first part of this verse 32 could have been included in verse 31. Let's look what it says. We'll read from the top. And it shall be unto you a Sabbath of rest and you shall afflict your souls. Now the context is affliction. This was the very first requirement that we had at the very beginning, and now this is the third mention of three. 3 times this has been mentioned about affliction of your soul. And right here in verse 32, the context is a required affliction, and it's for Day of Atonement, but there's a whole lot more to look at. This is where we need to pay attention. Remember, it said, you shall afflict your souls. When? In the 9th day of the 7th month. This is where the context of verse 32 is now moving from the 10th day to the 9th day. But the context is affliction. It's not Day of Atonement. What has moved to the 9th day? Yes, affliction. Affliction that now begins on the 9th day of the 7th month. The context for this phrase is still affliction, but it's a preparation for Day of Atonement that is still on the 10th day of the 7th month. And when is it supposed to happen? At even. This is even of the 9th day. Yes, we know what time on the 9th day because it says at even. The context for affliction begins at even. It's the time of the dusk twilight. No, Yahuwah did not change his mind to begin Yom Kippur on the 9th day. He still has it on the 10th day. Let's finish this verse up. It says, your affliction is from even unto even. That's what the context is, affliction. It has not changed from affliction. And this affliction lasts 24 hours from the even of the 9th day. And if you go 24 hours, you're going to land at even on the 10th day. And that's going to be Yom Kippur. And then it says, from even unto even shall you celebrate your Sabbath. It finishes up with a declaration that affliction of one's soul begins 12 hours in advance to be prepared for the celebration of the Atonement Sabbath that's going to happen at dawn or the break of day on the 10th day of the 7th month. It's actually really clear if you read it. I just took time to look up the word celebrate. It's 7673, and it's Shabbat. It's a primitive root. Remember, Sabbath is 7676, and it means to repose or to relax, to desist from exertion or inactivity. I just thought that was a really neat way to celebrate. We all think of celebrating as having a party and, being busy, eating, drinking, and being merry and having lots of fun. But this celebrate is used as inactivity, to rest and relax and to think about what's going on for Day of Atonement. So we're only looking at those 2 strict requirements, not the one about sacrifices that were repeated 3 times each. The first one that we're going to look at here is thy soul shall do no work, although afflict your soul came first. But the soul that does no work, you found it 3 times in verses 28, 30, and 31. Afflict your soul, it came up 3 times in verse 27, 29, and 32. The time frame for both of them was 24 hours. But for doing no work, that was on the full 10th day of the 7th month. It was from dawn to dawn for Day of Atonement to the 11th day at dawn. 24 hours for afflict your soul, but 12 hours was on the 9th day from dusk to dawn, and then you have 12 hours that finishes out on the 10th day, or Yom Kippur, and that's from dawn to dusk. So you have 24 hours for both of them. Obedience to both requirements was called celebrating with inactivity on the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. Just beautiful, really nice. Well, let's look at some charts. We have one chart for Day of Atonement according to the dawn format. There'll be 2 for sunset. The yellow here, or the large sections, are your day seasons. The orange are your dusk. I just have a little skinny blue one for night season, and the pinks are for your dawn daylight, your dawn twilight. Okay, so it's not to scale, but if you can follow it, this is what happens for Day of Atonement using dawn format. The 9th day of the month begins at dawn, right there on the 9th day. And then the affliction begins at the even of the 9th day, at the dusky part of the day, after the sun has gone down. This affliction, it continues to the even of the 10th day to fulfill the full 24-hour requirement. The affliction of one's soul has been in process for 12 hours upon the arrival of dawn on the day season of Day of Atonement, and that affliction continues another 12 hours during the sanctuary services, and it ends at even. So you're afflicting your soul from the even of the 9th all the way to the even of the 10th. Of course, the 10th day would have been the sanctuary services, so that was where the affliction was supposed to really mean a lot. Number 5, absolutely no work was to be done on the 24 hours of Day of Atonement until dawn of the 11th day. So your no work starts with the dawn morning of the Day of Atonement. The most important requirement for affliction of one's soul on the Day of Atonement is now completely fulfilled. 24 hours, but it actually starts at the even of the 9th, 24 hours. Let's see what happens when you put this onto a sunset format. It's very interesting. With the sunset theory, the 9th day of the month actually begins where, everybody? At even or sunset on the 8th day. Because sunset says that when, people say, when the sunset comes, that begins the 9th day. That's what they say, but they don't follow their rules, by the way. Okay, so that's where the affliction has to begin, at sunset, there on the 8th day. And that affliction is supposed to continue from even on the 8th day to the even of the 9th day. Remember, it's supposed to be a full 24 hours, even to even. So the affliction requirement in this case is going to be fulfilled before the Day of Atonement even begins. Already looks like there's a problem. So according to this, there's no affliction of one's soul that occurs on the Day of Atonement. You don't even get there. You're not going to work from the even of the 9th to the even of the 10th. You're not going to work there either, probably. Let's look at another chart. With the sunset day theory start, we have a lot of problems. If one wishes to afflict their soul to the even of Day of Atonement, and they begin at even on the 8th day of the month, their affliction will be a duration of 48 hours if they want to include Day of Atonement. That's a long time. The most important requirement for affliction of one's soul for only 24 hours has to be spread over the 9th and 10th days, and it causes the statutes for the Day of Atonement to be completely disregarded, because now you're afflicting for 48 hours instead of 24. I'm sure glad I know the right way. So the Day of Atonement solution for this new scenario, next time when you're in a similar situation, you will have a simple and very truthful answer for the commencement time for Day of Atonement, because now you know, and you can practice your study skills by looking up those definitions and remembering to read enough content, and reading the context is really important, and you can learn by teaching this to others because they probably don't know this as well. And I just like to say that Yah's ways are always simple, they're easy, and they're orderly. It's just a great way to learn. So I want to encourage all of you that with your Bible and an exhaustive concordance and some good study skills, you'll be able to answer some of the most challenging calendar questions easily. And I just pray that Yah will bless you abundantly. And that's the end. If you enjoy the studies and you have any questions because you don't quite understand, you can always write myself or Tim. We're at studythecalendar.com. And just remember that we're going to usher in Yahuwah's covenant day with the morning on Sabbath. And that's it. That's all she wrote.
All right. Thank you, Charlene. I can't wait till the next one. This is going to be great. Great. Thank you. Any questions, anybody? I'm sure. Questions? Comments? No questions? No comments? Really? Now that goes to show you you've done it. That was an excellent job. Hallelujah. Thank you, Charlene. Thank you, Yahuwah, most of all.
Well, maybe they're frightened to death. Maybe they're scared to death to say anything. I don't know.
Yeah,
no,
that was.
I'll say
Anyway.
it was really good. It was very in depth, and I had a question and I didn't write it down, and now I forgot. But you had to hang in there, because once you got to the between the evenings, all of that other stuff started making sense, and it explained a lot. And I'm glad you explained the Day of Atonement, because I was hung up on that too. And it makes, I mean, like you said, I started thinking, I think I'm going to make a page in Word that says content and context, and make a bunch of copies. So when I'm studying, I can use that.
Good for you.
That's really good. So that was a helpful tip too, but I thought it was fantastic. I was starting to get a little bit overwhelmed, but I hung in there, and it made sense as we got to the end. So very good, Charlene, as usual. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stacy, for sharing that. You just said kind of a, let's see, I don't use this word very much, but kind of a magic statement there. I hung in there. You know, that's the magic of it. Not that, I like that word. What's a better word, somebody? Not magic, but you hung in there, bottom line.
I don't know about a magic word, but I know that those that are persistent and are willing to pay the dues and put in the time, those are the ones that receive the reward.
Yeah. And this was flat out scripture reading. And if there's any argument about what you heard, you have to take it up with Yahuwah, because it was right out of the word. So that was the bomb, Charlene. Thank you. Hallelujah. That was good.
Well, I just want to say that, you know, hung in there. It takes some grit and determination, but when you start to see how it all comes together, and then you go back and you try to fit the stuff back into sunset, you're just going to find out it is such a massive confusion, and you'll say to yourself, how did I ever believe that stuff? Like it just doesn't make sense. But the reason we believed it, because we never questioned it, and we didn't know we had to question it. And so, you know, it's the best thing that ever happened to Tim and myself was.
Yeah. You mind if I ask a question that's not on topic, but kind of, it's still, it's a calendar question, but it's not on topic. You mind if I?
No, go ahead.
Okay, let me put on my glasses. So I know that this person that I contacted is not on the same calendar that we are on, does not understand the idea of you know, dawn to dawn. But I just, because I know where he's at, I said, have a blessed preparation and Sabbath day. Okay, this was, well, anyway, I'll just leave it at that. And then he said, Amen, be Amen, hallelujah, love all you mishpachah. And then he sent another one a little bit later and said, and it was preparation day, and the Sabbath was approaching in Luke 23:54. And it was preparation day, and the Sabbath was approaching. Well, where I looked, it said the Sabbath was drawing on. It was continuing, okay, drawing on. And then I said, does it say approaching or drew on, as like in continued on? I guess that would kind of mean the same either way, wouldn't it? And could that day in Luke 23:54 have been the true Passover? He did die as the Passover lamb on Passover the 14th, isn't that right? And then making the next day being unleavened bread. So I wrote it like this, and that day, Passover, was the preparation, and then parentheses, for unleavened bread. The Sabbath Passover drew on. Just a thought. With much love, I pray. Did I answer correctly?
I would have, yeah, you answered well, Mario, but I would have brought him to the word epiphosko. When we see that word drew on or was approaching, that word comes from the Greek word epiphosko, and the meaning is to grow light. The other place you'll see that word is in Matthew 28:1, where it was at the end of the Sabbath as it began to dawn, or epiphosko, to the first day of the week. It's very, very, very highly specific. It identifies an exact